Now, before we dive into anything, I know it is very common for you to have a brief synopsis of the author before you actually learn anything about his book, but I feel like in this case, it will be better, maybe even more beneficial, if you understand the basis of what this book is about before I explain anything to you about the man who wrote it. Blink is a book that is about thinking without thinking. It draws ideas from up-and-coming neuroscience as well as psychology to explain how we make snap decisions without really thinking about it. This dives into the idea that good decision-making and bad decision-making have much less to do with the amount of information that you have, but rather it deals with your ability to focus on specific important details. To be more specific, Blink teaches us about rapid cognition, and that's just the technical term for those decisions that you make quickly without thinking about it. The most common example of this is when you meet somebody new. They come up to you on the street, and without even talking to them, you know in those first 2 seconds what type of person they are, how they will treat you, based off of how they dress and how they carry themselves in public. And it's such a weird concept to think about, but that's what it is. That's what rapid cognition is. And Blink is about those 2 seconds that happen over and over in our lives, and why they happen, and how we make those decisions, and how we can make better decisions in the future. Malcolm Gladwell, the author of Blink, is very well known for his information-intensive nonfiction pieces. He was born in England in the early 1960s, but then he moved to Canada, where he grew up, and eventually he wound up in America, where he worked for the Washington Post, but he currently works for the New Yorker, where he has been for almost 20 years. Gladwell has written many award-winning pieces, like The Tipping Point and What the Dog Saw, but I picked this book. But he has pages in the back that he uses to address readers' questions and answer those, and the most important one that he answered for me was why he wrote this book in the first place. For this piece in particular, Gladwell actually got the idea from a personal interaction that he had. One day he just decided that he wanted to grow his hair out, and as you can see in this picture, it gets pretty shaggy when he grows it out. Almost immediately after he grew his hair out, he noticed that things in his life started to change a little bit. Like, he would get pulled over and given speeding tickets a lot, or he got pulled out of airport security much more frequently than he had before. But what really pushed him the most was that one day cops had stopped him on the road to question him. So the police stopped him on the side of the street because they were looking for a criminal, and supposedly they said that the criminal looked a lot like Gladwell, which was strange because Gladwell got to see the police sketch, and he says that the man they were looking for was a bit heavier than he was, substantially taller, and clearly much younger than Gladwell was at the time. The only thing that they really had in common was this huge head of hair that he had finally just decided to grow out. I mean, the officers let him go, but that experience really got Gladwell thinking, because that 2-second impression that they had of him to begin with convinced them so much, it stuck in their heads for so long, that it took him 20 minutes to convince them that he was not the man that they were looking for. That is how powerful rapid cognition is. And knowing about rapid cognition can be extremely helpful. We all know about the fight or flight mechanisms that are in our body, but both fight and flight use these rapid cognitive responses that we don't really consciously think about. And being able to understand these and manipulate these urges in a way can really put you ahead of the game. The book itself consists of 7 chapters, or 7 big examples of how people have observed this rapid cognition in everyday life. The first scenario that Gladwell presents us with is this image of a statue in a museum that doesn't quite look right. Long story short, in 1983, there was an art dealer who claimed that he had a 6th century BC Greek statue. And with that age, you know that it has to be valuable. And so this museum wanted to buy it, but they wanted to make sure it was not a forgery. So they took it in, and for months and months, they tested it and checked papers, and they even took samples of its core to test the age to make sure it was authentic. And after these months and months of testing, they decided that it was authentic, and they bought it and they put it on display in their museum. But not too long afterwards, people came by and they were looking at it, and some of these experts that were coming in said that there were pieces of the statue that didn't quite look right, but they couldn't quite place their finger on it. They couldn't pinpoint it properly. There was one man that just looked at the fingernails and said that they felt wrong to him. And so after all of this commotion, the museum brought the piece back for observation, and they noticed that the artistic styles of the statue came from different artistic periods, and that there were so many small discrepancies, they could not quite say that the piece was not a forgery. And so now the piece is essentially worthless. That is how powerful this rapid cognition is. These people were saying that it seemed wrong, but they did not know why. We are able to draw these sort of conclusions from small pieces of information, even if we're not entirely informed of the situation. There is a scientist that is discussed in this book, and he has used this observational ability to be with couples for 15 minutes and know if their marriage will last or not. Everything in this book is about the small things. It seems so unrealistic, but it's the small things that give us away. The most interesting example of this, I feel, is in the second to last chapter. It's called 7 Seconds in the Bronx, and in it, Gladwell introduces us to this man, Paul Ekman, who is so good at identifying facial cues to tell if people are lying or not, that it is his job, that is what he does. These facial expressions come and go so quickly that to the normal human eye, they go undetected. These are called micro-expressions, and they are a sort of involuntary reaction that happens to everybody. Gladwell explains it this way in the novel. If I were to ask you to smile, you would flex your zygomatic major, which is located here on your face. By contrast, if you were to smile spontaneously with real emotion, you would not only flex your zygomatic, but also tighten the area around your eye. It is almost impossible to tighten this muscle on demand. It only happens in the presence of true emotion. Very similarly, we express these sort of micro-expressions. Ekman takes tapes from court hearings and press statements and other similar situations, and frame by frame goes through and observes people's facial expressions until he sees that involuntary movement. And that is what tells him that they are lying, or they are not telling us something that they know. This is one of my favorite excerpts from the book, and I think it really explains how the common person uses this observational ability on a day-to-day basis. What Ekman is describing is the physiological basis of how we thin slice other people. We can all mind read effortlessly and automatically because the clues we need to make sense of someone or some social situation are right there on the faces of those in front of us. We may not be able to read faces as brilliantly as someone like Ekman, but there is enough accessible information on a face to make everyday mind reading possible. When somebody tells us, "I love you," we look immediately and directly at him or her because by looking at the face, we can know about whether or not that sentiment is genuine. A baby looks into your eyes when you cup your hands over hers because she knows she can find an explanation in your face. And that is the power of observation. It allows you to think without thinking. Personally, I really struggle with reading nonfiction works, but I feel like Malcolm Gladwell just has a way of writing that really brings the common person in and makes you feel like you are able to understand the world around you by understanding these really, really complex ideas. Like any book that is written by a real intellectual, there are going to be places where you have to go back and reread this to fully comprehend what he is saying. That being said, after reading this book in its entirety, I would definitely encourage all of you to go out and get a copy of your own or borrow it and read it for yourself. Because not only do I feel like I'm kind of educated on the idea of rapid cognition, but I want to learn more about it. It gave me this craving for more information about it. If you guys would like to go out and purchase this or any of Malcolm Gladwell's other books, I'm leaving links in the description below. But besides that, thank you for watching this video, and I hope that it benefited you in some way.